"Get out of the way, Grandpa. Security doesn't wait for the elderly." The TSA agent barked, then forcefully shoved Colonel Richard Eagle Eye Thompson aside, causing the 80-year-old veteran's cane to clatter across the floor as he collapsed against the metal detector. Eagle Eye's medals jangled as he struggled to regain his balance, dignity intact despite the burning humiliation. "Young man, respect is earned, not demanded," he said quietly. The agent sneered and turned away. 7 minutes later, as the decorated Air Force legend sat recovering on a bench, a commanding presence swept through the terminal. "Agent Daniels." The terminal fell silent as a towering 4-star general approached. "You will surrender your credentials immediately. If you believe that those who sacrificed for freedom deserve our highest respect, type honor below. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Colonel Richard Eagle Eye Thompson had long ago accepted that the world moved at a different pace than he did these days. At 80 years old, with a distinguished 40-year military career behind him, he had learned to navigate life with the same careful precision that had once guided his bombing runs over enemy territory. His gait was measured now, supported by a polished oak cane that had been a gift from his squadron after his retirement ceremony. "To help you navigate civilian life," they had joked. The humor had become reality as age caught up with even the legendary Eagle Eye. Today's journey held special significance. After decades of classified missions, the government had finally declassified Operation Starlight, the daring 1971 rescue mission over North Vietnam that had saved 37 American POWs and earned Thompson his Distinguished Service Cross. A permanent exhibit at the National Air and Space Museum would be unveiled tomorrow, honoring the men who had flown what many military historians now regarded as one of the most audacious rescue operations in modern warfare. As the last surviving pilot from the mission's lead squadron, Richard's presence wasn't just requested, it was essential. He had dressed with care that morning in his modest apartment just outside of Tucson. Though his formal uniform no longer fit his diminished frame, he wore a crisp blue button-down shirt with his campaign ribbons and Distinguished Service Cross precisely pinned above the pocket. His silver hair was neatly combed, his weathered face freshly shaved. Age had bent his once towering 6'2" frame to just under 5'10", but he still carried himself with the straight-backed posture that had been drilled into him at the academy all those decades ago. Eagle Eye had arrived at Tucson International Airport 3 hours early, well aware of his slower pace and the additional scrutiny his artificial hip would likely trigger at security. The morning had started pleasantly enough. The ticket agent at the Sky West counter had noticed his military pins and upgraded him to first class with a warm smile and a sincere "Thank you for your service, Colonel." A young man in the security line had insisted Thompson go ahead of him, refusing to take no for an answer. "My grandfather was Air Force too, sir. He didn't make it back from Desert Storm. It would be an honor." These small courtesies had warmed Richard's heart. Despite the divisive noise of modern politics, these everyday moments reminded him that reverence for service still existed in the national character. It gave him hope that tomorrow's ceremony would help bridge some of the generational divides that seem so prevalent in today's discourse. The security area at Tucson International was unusually crowded for a Tuesday morning. A computer system update had taken 2 of the screening lanes offline, creating a bottleneck that had passengers shifting impatiently. Thompson stood in the priority lane, having removed his worn leather belt, his watch and his shoes, a process that took him considerably longer than the business people around him. He had placed his cane on the conveyor belt last, knowing he would need to navigate the body scanner without its support. The TSA supervisor overseeing the checkpoint was a heavy-set man named Agent Frank Daniels. His dark blue uniform strained at the buttons, and perspiration beaded on his forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning. His name badge was slightly askew, his expression a mask of irritation as he barked orders at travelers and subordinates alike. "Keep it moving, people. Electronics out of bags. Shoes off. Let's go." Daniel's voice carried the artificial authority of someone who had memorized procedures without understanding their purpose. He moved through the checkpoint area with aggressive energy, his eyes constantly scanning for any deviation from protocol that might require his intervention. Colonel Thompson stood at the entrance to the body scanner, waiting for the TSA officer inside to motion him forward. His artificial hip always set off the metal detectors, a fact he had noted on his boarding pass and mentioned to the document checker. Still, he knew the drill. He would require additional screening, and he had factored this inevitability into his generous time buffer. "Sir, when you're ready," the young female TSA officer said, gesturing toward the scanner with a professional but not unkind expression. Richard nodded and carefully stepped into the machine, raising his arms as instructed and holding the somewhat uncomfortable position. Without his cane, maintaining balance required concentration, and he focused on a spot on the wall to steady himself. "Sir, can you please keep your arms higher?" the officer requested. Thompson adjusted as best he could, the arthritis in his shoulders protesting the movement. "Doing my best, ma'am," he replied with a small smile. "These old wings don't soar quite like they used to." The scanner completed its cycle and, as expected, highlighted his artificial hip on the display. The TSA officer nodded, unsurprised. "I'll need to perform additional screening, sir. If you could step over here." Her instructions were interrupted by Agent Daniels, who had noticed the pause in the line's flow. "What's the hold-up here?" he demanded, striding over to the scanner. "Artificial hip, sir," the officer explained. "I'm going to conduct the additional screening per protocol." Daniels looked at Thompson with undisguised impatience. "How long is this going to take?" he asked, not addressing the colonel directly, but speaking about him as if he were an inconvenient piece of luggage. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Standard procedure, sir. 3 to 5 minutes, the female officer replied, maintaining her professionalism. Daniels checked his watch dramatically. "We don't have 3 to 5 minutes. The line is backing up to the main terminal." He turned to Richard for the first time. "Sir, we need to keep things moving. Let's expedite this process." Before the female officer could begin the proper screening protocol, Daniels inserted himself into the process. "I'll handle this," he said dismissively, motioning for her to return to the scanner for the next passenger. "Sir, your cane," she said to Thompson, pointing to where it had emerged from the X-ray machine. Richard looked over, calculating whether he could reach it without assistance. It lay just beyond comfortable reach. "I'll get to it," Daniel snapped. "First, let's clear this area." He turned to Thompson. "Sir, I need you to step over here immediately." His tone held no respect, no acknowledgement that he was addressing a man who had flown combat missions in 3 wars. "I'll need my cane first, son," Thompson said calmly, using the familiar address that military men of his generation often employed. "These old bones don't take orders as well as they used to." Daniel's face darkened at being addressed as son. "The cane will be returned after screening. Move to the designated area now." He pointed to a spot several feet away, ignoring Thompson's evident difficulty in standing without support. Colonel Thompson took a careful step, then another, maintaining his dignity despite the discomfort. A lifetime of discipline had taught him to manage pain without displaying weakness. Still, his progress was slower than Daniels wanted. "Get out of the way, Grandpa. Security doesn't wait for the elderly," Daniels suddenly barked, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Then, in a move that shocked everyone in the vicinity, he placed his hand on Thompson's shoulder and forcefully pushed him toward the screening area. The shove wasn't violent, but it was wholly unnecessary and especially dangerous for an elderly man with balance issues. Richard Thompson, who had once landed a crippled F-4 Phantom on the deck of an aircraft carrier in a typhoon, found himself suddenly unmoored. His center of gravity shifted treacherously. His left foot caught against his right, and without his cane to stabilize him, he stumbled sideways into the metal detector frame. The collision wasn't catastrophic, but it was humiliating. Thompson's shoulder struck the metal frame with enough force to send a jolt of pain down his arm. His medals and ribbons jangled against his chest as he fought to regain his balance. Behind him, his cane clattered to the floor where another passenger had accidentally knocked it from the edge of the conveyor belt. The terminal area near the checkpoint fell into a shocked silence. Several passengers gasped. A woman said loudly, "That was completely unnecessary." A businessman in line began recording with his phone. Richard Thompson, veteran of countless missions over hostile territory, recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, the man whose precision flying had earned him the call sign Eagle Eye, stood braced against the metal detector, his breathing carefully controlled as he gathered himself. The pain in his shoulder was significant, but the wound to his dignity cut deeper. Daniels, seemingly oblivious to the impropriety of his actions, simply pointed to the screening area again. "Complete your screening, sir," he said, his tone unchanged. Thompson straightened himself as best he could, his blue eyes still sharp. Despite his years, fixed on Daniels with a gaze that had once intimidated generals. "Young man," he said quietly, but with perfect clarity, "respect is earned, not demanded." The simple dignity of his response hung in the air. Daniels sneered, unmoved. "Security protocol is not about respect, it's about compliance." He turned away dismissively, calling to another agent, "Retrieve the gentleman's cane," after completing the pat-down. A different TSA officer, a middle-aged man who had witnessed the entire exchange with evident discomfort, approached Thompson. "Sir, I apologize. Please let me help you to the screening area. I'll conduct your additional screening with all due respect." This officer gently supported Thompson's elbow, guiding him to a bench in the screening area. He retrieved the colonel's cane himself and brought it over, along with Thompson's shoes and personal items. "I'm very sorry about that, sir," he said quietly, as he prepared to conduct the pat-down. "That's not how we're trained to treat any passenger, especially not someone who's served." Richard nodded his acknowledgement but said nothing. His thoughts had traveled backward in time to the jungles of Vietnam, to the mountains of Korea, to moments when maintaining composure under pressure had been a matter of life and death. This was a minor indignity by comparison, yet it stung in a different way. It reflected a dissolution of the social contract he had fought to protect, the basic covenant of respect between citizens of a nation he had dedicated his life to defending. The secondary screening was completed with efficiency and respect. Thompson was cleared to proceed to his gate with a mumbled apology from the second officer, who couldn't quite meet his eyes, perhaps from embarrassment at his colleague's behavior. Richard gathered his belongings, secured his belt, and carefully retied his shoes, a task that took him longer than it once had. He politely waved off offers of assistance from sympathetic fellow travelers. 7 minutes had passed since the incident. Thompson had made his way to a bench just beyond the security checkpoint, intending to collect himself before the long walk to his gate. His shoulder throbbed where it had struck the metal frame. He would have a bruise tomorrow, an unwelcome addition to the physical discomforts of age that already accompanied him daily. As he sat there, his thoughts were not of self-pity or even anger, but of concern for the larger implications. If this was how someone with visible signs of age and service was treated in public, what did it say about the national character he had devoted his life to defending? The medals on his chest suddenly felt heavy, not with pride, but with the weight of uncertainty about what they still meant in today's America. He was so absorbed in these reflections that he didn't immediately notice the change in the terminal's atmosphere. The normal cacophony of announcements, rolling luggage, and conversations had dimmed, replaced by a strange, expectant hush that spread like a wave from the main concourse. Then came the footsteps, measured, purposeful, unmistakably military, in their rhythm and weight. Richard's ears, trained by decades of cockpit service to recognize the subtlest changes in engine pitch, detected them before he looked up. Moving through the concourse with the unstoppable momentum of a flagship cutting through waters was an imposing figure in full military dress uniform. The 4 silver stars on each shoulder caught the fluorescent lighting, creating momentary flashes that drew every eye in the terminal. General Michael Harrington, commander of the Air Combat Command, 6'3" and ramrod straight even at 68, moved with purpose toward the security checkpoint, flanked by 2 sharp-looking aides and the airport's visibly nervous director of operations. Colonel Thompson recognized Harrington immediately. Though they had never served together directly, the general's reputation was legendary within Air Force circles, a tactical genius who had modernized air combat doctrine while maintaining unwavering respect for the service's traditions and its people. His presence at Tucson International was no coincidence. He was scheduled to speak at tomorrow's ceremony, unveiling the Operation Starlight exhibit. The terminal fell completely silent as General Harrington stopped at the security checkpoint, his eyes scanning the area with tactical precision until they locked onto Agent Daniels, who was checking another passenger's ID with the same brusque efficiency he had displayed earlier. "Agent Daniels!" The general's voice, trained through decades of command to carry across flight lines and through storm conditions, boomed through the terminal. It wasn't a shout. It was an invocation of authority that physically stopped every person within hearing range. Daniels froze, ID and boarding pass still in hand, his head slowly turning toward the source of that voice. His face, previously flushed with the petty authority of his position, drained of color as he registered the uniform, the stars, and the unmistakable aura of genuine command. "Sir?" he managed weakly, unintentionally releasing the documents back to their owner. General Harrington covered the distance to the checkpoint in measured strides, each footfall seeming to echo in the preternatural silence that had fallen over the usually bustling terminal. He stopped directly in front of the security barrier, his presence demanding immediate attention without the need to raise his voice further. "You will surrender your credentials immediately." Though spoken at a more moderate volume, each word fell like a hammer blow. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even an order. It was a statement of inevitable fact. Daniels, visibly shaking now, fumbled with his TSA badge. "Sir, I don't understand. What you understand or fail to understand is no longer relevant." "Agent Daniels," General Harrington interrupted, his voice now controlled but no less commanding. "7 minutes ago, you physically assaulted a decorated combat veteran, a man who has served this nation with distinction in 3 wars, a man who, while you were still in diapers, was flying combat missions to rescue American prisoners of war under enemy fire." The general's eyes, cold as steel, never left Daniels's face. "The man you addressed as Grandpa and shoved against a metal detector is Colonel Richard Eagle Eye Thompson, recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, 3 Silver Stars, and the Air Force Cross. He has flown more combat missions than you have worked shifts at this checkpoint, and he has done so with a level of courage and dignity that you have spectacularly failed to display today." The hushed terminal had become an impromptu theater, with passengers and airport staff alike frozen in place, witnessing what felt like a scene from another era. A time when actions had immediate consequences and respect was non-negotiable. General Harrington extended his hand, palm up. "Your credentials, Agent Daniels. Now." The authority in his voice brooked no argument. Daniels, moving as if in a trance, unclipped his TSA badge and identification card from his uniform and placed them in the general's outstretched hand. "The director of the TSA has been notified of this incident," General Harrington continued, his voice now addressing not just Daniels, but the entire checkpoint staff and, by extension, everyone within earshot. "Agent Daniels' employment is suspended, pending a full investigation. This is not a matter of procedure or policy. This is a matter of basic human decency and respect, qualities that appear to be in short supply in Agent Daniels' character." He turned slightly, acknowledging the airport director who stood nearby, looking simultaneously impressed and terrified. "Mr. Caldwell has agreed that a complete review of security protocols at this airport, with special emphasis on the treatment of elderly passengers, veterans, and those with medical devices, will begin immediately." The general then did something unexpected. He stepped back from the checkpoint and turned to face the gathered crowd of travelers. His voice, still carrying the natural authority of command, but now tempered with a statesman's gravitas, addressed them all. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you have witnessed this unfortunate incident. What you have seen today, both the disrespect shown to Colonel Thompson and the consequences that have followed, is a reminder that in America, how we treat one another matters. Efficiency never trumps dignity. Authority never supersedes respect." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the impromptu audience. "The uniform I wear and the stars on my shoulders represent something larger than any individual. They represent a covenant between those who serve and the nation they protect. That covenant demands that we treat each other, all of us, in and out of uniform, with the respect that free citizens of a great nation deserve." The terminal remained silent, but the atmosphere had transformed. What had begun as shocked witnessing of a public humiliation had become something else, a collective recognition of values that, while sometimes forgotten in the rush of modern life, remained fundamental to the national character. "General." Harrington then turned away from the crowd and walked directly to where Colonel Thompson sat on the bench. The general, despite his impressive height and bearing, did something that caused a ripple of surprise through the onlooking travelers. He came to attention and rendered a perfect regulation salute to the seated octogenarian. "Colonel Thompson," he said, his voice now warm with genuine respect, "on behalf of the United States Air Force and a grateful nation, I apologize for the treatment you received today. Your service deserves better. You deserve better." "Richard." Thompson, moved by this unexpected gesture from a four-star general, rose carefully to his feet with the aid of his cane. Old habits die hard, and despite his civilian clothes, he returned the salute with precision that belied his years. "Thank you, General," he said simply, "but this isn't about me." "No, sir, it isn't," Harrington agreed. "It's about who we are as a service and as a nation." He gestured toward the main concourse. "Your flight to Washington departs in 90 minutes. With your permission, I'd like to escort you to the Air Force VIP lounge. My staff will ensure your luggage is taken care of, and we can arrange for transportation directly to your hotel in D.C. Thompson nodded his acceptance of the offer, understanding that to refuse would deny the general the opportunity to make proper amends, not just to him personally, but symbolically to all who had served. As the two men walked side by side through the terminal, the tall, commanding general deliberately matching his pace to the careful steps of the elderly colonel, travelers spontaneously moved aside, many offering quiet nods of respect or whispered thanks for their service. Some stood at attention, a few veterans saluted. Parents explained in hushed tones to their children who these men were and what they represented. What had begun as a moment of casual cruelty had transformed into an impromptu ceremony of remembrance and respect, a living demonstration that, while individuals might sometimes forget the values that bound the nation together, those values remained woven into the fabric of American life, ready to reassert themselves when challenged. Behind them, Agent Daniels stood motionless at the checkpoint, stripped of his badge and authority, watching as the two military men disappeared into the crowd, one at the end of his journey, one still in command, but both part of a tradition that had defined and defended the nation through its darkest hours. In their wake, they left not just an impression but a reminder that true authority comes not from a badge or position, but from character and respect, once earned through sacrifice. And service remains forever due. The regular rhythms of the airport gradually resumed. Announcements echoed through the terminal. Passengers hurried to gates. Security screening continued. But something had changed, if only temporarily, in how the people in that terminal viewed one another. A lesson had been witnessed, a covenant reaffirmed, a standard of behavior reset not through rules or regulations, but through the living example of leadership. The Air Force VIP lounge at Tucson International Airport existed in a different dimension from the bustling public terminal. Here, the lighting was softer, the seating plush and comfortable, the conversations conducted in measured tones rather than the harried cadence of travel. As Colonel Thompson settled into a leather armchair, the events of the past hour seemed almost surreal, a jarring collision between the world as it should be and the world as it sometimes was. General Harrington had excused himself momentarily to make several calls, leaving Thompson with a cup of coffee that had been prepared exactly as he preferred it, black with just a hint of sugar. The general's aide, a sharp-eyed major named Rebecca Collins, had somehow divined this preference without asking. It was the kind of small courtesy that spoke volumes about the culture Harrington fostered among his staff. "Colonel Thompson," Major Collins approached with a tablet in hand, "we've confirmed your first-class accommodation on the direct flight to Reagan National. The plane is currently boarding, but the captain has been informed of the situation and assures us they'll hold for your arrival. We've also taken the liberty of contacting your hotel in Washington to arrange early check-in and ensuring your luggage will be prioritized upon arrival." Richard nodded his thanks, marveling at the efficiency with which the Air Force still operated. Some things never changed, and for that, he was grateful. "That's very kind, Major. Please extend my appreciation to the flight crew. I don't want to inconvenience other travelers any more than necessary." "No inconvenience at all, sir," Collins replied with genuine respect. "The captain specifically asked me to tell you it's an honor to have you aboard. He's a former F-16 pilot himself." Thompson smiled. The brotherhood of military aviators transcended generations, aircraft types, and even eras of service. From the canvas and wood biplanes of World War I to today's fifth-generation fighters, those who took to the skies in defense of their nation shared a bond that civilians could rarely comprehend. General Harrington returned, his commanding presence filling the room without effort. He took a seat across from Thompson, his posture perfect, yet somehow relaxed. "That was the TSA administrator on the phone," he said without preamble. "She's personally reviewing the security footage and has already issued directives for an agency-wide review of protocols regarding treatment of elderly passengers, veterans, and those with medical devices." "That seems excessive for one isolated incident," Thompson observed, uncomfortable with being the cause of such disruption. Harrington's expression darkened slightly. "Unfortunately, Colonel, this wasn't an isolated incident. Preliminary review suggests Agent Daniels has a pattern of similar behavior that somehow escaped proper supervision. Your case simply brought it to light in a way that couldn't be ignored." The general leaned forward, his hands clasped. "Richard, if I may, what happened to you today represents a failure not just of one individual, but of a system that sometimes prioritizes process over people. When procedures become more important than the citizens they're designed to protect, we've lost something essential about who we are as a nation." Thompson nodded thoughtfully. Throughout his long career, he had witnessed the eternal tension between systems and the humans they were meant to serve. In the cockpit we had a saying, checklists are written in blood. Every procedure exists because someone, somewhere, paid the ultimate price for its absence. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But we also taught that the pilot's judgment always trumps the checklist in the moment of crisis. Human discernment can never be fully replaced by protocol. "Exactly," Harrington agreed. "That's the balance we've lost in so many areas of public life. The judgment, the human element, the simple recognition that behind every procedure is a person deserving of dignity." Their conversation was interrupted by a discreet knock. Major Collins appeared at the door with a man Thompson recognized as the TSA officer who had conducted his secondary screening with such professionalism. "General Colonel," Collins said formally, "Officer James Morales has requested a moment of your time. He was present during the incident at the security checkpoint." Harrington nodded his permission, and Officer Morales stepped forward, his posture unconsciously straightening in the presence of the two senior officers. "Colonel Thompson," he began, his voice steady but respectful, "I wanted to personally apologize for what happened at the checkpoint. Agent Daniels's actions were completely contrary to our training and values. I should have intervened sooner." Richard waved away the apology. "You conducted yourself professionally once you were involved, son. We can't always control the actions of others, only our response to them." Morales nodded gratefully but continued. "There's something else, sir. After you left the checkpoint, several passengers approached me. They had recorded the incident on their phones and wanted to ensure the footage reached the proper authorities. I've taken the liberty of compiling those recordings and submitting them through official channels, but I thought you should know." Thompson's expression tightened slightly. The thought of his moment of vulnerability being captured and shared didn't sit well with him. He had always been a private man, uncomfortable with attention that wasn't directly related to his duties. General Harrington, sensing Thompson's discomfort, intervened smoothly. "Thank you, Officer Morales. That was good initiative. Please ensure those citizens understand that their recordings should not be shared on social media out of respect for Colonel Thompson's privacy." "Already addressed, sir," Morales replied with a crisp nod. Most agreed immediately. For the few who hesitated, I explained the Colonel's distinguished service record and his right to dignity. They came around quickly. Thompson felt a surge of gratitude for this young officer's understanding and discretion. It was a reminder that integrity and empathy still flourished even in unexpected places. "There's one more thing, Colonel," Morales added, reaching into his pocket. "Your distinguished service cross-pin became detached during the incident. I found it near the scanner." He held out the small medal, its gold surface catching the light. "I thought you might want it for tomorrow's ceremony." Richard accepted the medal with a slightly trembling hand, genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "Thank you, son. This means more than you know." After Morales departed, Thompson carefully reattached the distinguished service crosspin to his shirt. The simple act carried profound meaning, a small but significant restoration of what had been temporarily disrupted. Order from chaos, respect from disrespect, the natural balance of a society that, despite occasional failures, still recognized the value of service and sacrifice. General Harrington watched this quiet moment with understanding. The ceremony tomorrow is going to be significant, Richard. Operation Starlight has been classified for so long that most Americans have no idea what you and your squadron accomplished. That changes tomorrow. Thompson nodded, his thoughts drifting back to that moonless night over North Vietnam. The mission details might be newly declassified, but the memories had never left him. The anti-aircraft fire illuminating the jungle below like deadly fireworks. The radio chatter of pilots maintaining formation through cloud cover, so thick it seemed solid. The weight of responsibility knowing that dozens of American POWs were counting on their precision and courage. "I'm not comfortable with the attention," he admitted. "We did what needed doing, that's all. Many didn't come back. They're the ones who deserve recognition." "And they'll receive it," Harrington assured him. "But the country needs living heroes. Too, Richard. Especially now, when the concept of sacrifice for something larger than oneself seems increasingly foreign to younger generations." Thompson considered this. Throughout his life, he had rejected the label of hero, believing it belonged to those who hadn't returned home to build lives, raise families, and grow old. Yet he had come to understand that his continued presence served as a vital link between past and present, a living embodiment of values that might otherwise become abstract or forgotten. "The world has changed so much," Thompson mused, looking out the window at the modern aircraft waiting on the tarmac, sleek, computerized machines that bore little resemblance to the analog fighters he had flown. "Sometimes I wonder if there's still a place for the old values." "There will always be a place for courage, integrity, and service," Harrington replied with conviction. "The forms may change, but the foundations remain. That's what tomorrow is about, not just honoring the past, but ensuring its lessons endure." A soft chime from Major Collins' tablet interrupted their conversation. "Gentlemen, the flight is ready for Colonel Thompson's boarding. We have a courtesy vehicle waiting to transport you directly to the aircraft." The journey through the terminal to the waiting courtesy vehicle was markedly different from Thompson's earlier experience. Word of the incident had spread, and travelers stopped to offer respectful nods or quiet words of appreciation as General Harrington escorted the elderly veteran. Airport staff stood straighter, their customer service suddenly impeccable. It was a visible reminder of how quickly institutional culture could change when leadership set a clear example. As they approached the exit, Thompson spotted a familiar face, the businessman who had been recording with his phone when Daniels had pushed him. The man approached cautiously, respectfully waiting for acknowledgement before speaking. "Colonel Thompson, my name is David Mercer. I witnessed what happened earlier." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "My son is at the Air Force Academy now, his second year. I'm going to send him the security footage, not to share publicly," he added quickly, seeing Thompson's expression, "but as a teaching moment. I want him to see what real dignity looks like under pressure and what real leadership looks like." In response, Thompson was momentarily speechless, touched by the unexpected impact of what had been, for him, simply an effort to maintain his composure in a difficult moment. "Your son is fortunate to have a father who recognizes such lessons," he finally replied. "Tell him that the Academy will teach him many things, but the most important, character under pressure, is something he'll have to discover within himself when the moment demands it." Mercer nodded gratefully. "He'll value that message. Sir, thank you." As they continued toward the waiting vehicle, Thompson reflected on this exchange. Perhaps there was purpose, even in indignity, lessons that rippled outward in ways one could never anticipate. The thought brought a measure of peace, transforming what had been merely an unpleasant incident into something potentially meaningful. The courtesy vehicle, a discreet black SUV with government plates, waited with its engine running. The driver, an Air Force sergeant in uniform, jumped out to open the door as they approached. General Harrington escorted Thompson to the vehicle, but didn't enter himself. "I have some matters to attend to here before catching my own flight," he explained. "Major Collins will ensure you're comfortably settled on the aircraft and will provide you with my contact information in Washington. I'll see you at the ceremony tomorrow, Colonel." The two men exchanged salutes one final time. As Thompson settled into the comfortable leather seat of the SUV, Harrington leaned in briefly. "One more thing, Richard. When I received word of what happened, I made a call to someone I thought should know. She'll be meeting your flight at Reagan National." Before Thompson could ask for clarification, the door closed, and the vehicle began its journey across the tarmac. Through the window, he watched General Harrington's tall figure grow smaller, still standing at attention until the SUV turned toward the runway. Major Collins, seated beside him, worked quietly on her tablet, occasionally relaying information through her secure phone. The orchestration of logistics continued seamlessly around him, another reminder of the military efficiency that had defined so much of his life. The SUV pulled directly alongside the waiting aircraft, where the captain and chief flight attendant stood at the foot of the mobile stairway. The captain, as Major Collins had mentioned, was indeed a former fighter pilot. His bearing and the subtle ways he carried himself made it obvious to Thompson's experienced eye, even before he rendered a crisp regulation salute. "Colonel Thompson, it's an honor to have you aboard, sir. I'm Captain Michael Reynolds, formerly with the 35th Fighter Squadron out of Kunsan." "The Flying Panthers." Thompson nodded appreciatively. "Good outfit." "The best, sir," Reynolds agreed with a smile. "Your mission over Hanoi was required reading for us at the Academy. What you pulled off with the technology of that era—" He shook his head in admiration. "Frankly, sir, it's still hard to believe, even with today's avionics." Thompson accepted the compliment with a modest nod. The flight attendant, a woman in her 50s with a warm, professional demeanor, then stepped forward. "Colonel, we've prepared the forward cabin for your comfort. Given your earlier experience, we thought you might appreciate some privacy for the flight. The entire crew is at your service." The boarding process was handled with smooth efficiency. Thompson found himself in a private section of first class, separated from other passengers by a discreet curtain. The seat was spacious, the amenities abundant, but what touched him most was the small vase containing a single white rose placed on his tray table, the traditional symbol of remembrance for fallen aviators. Someone had taken the time to learn and honor the customs of his generation of service members. As the aircraft began its pushback from the gate, Thompson gazed out the window at Tucson International. The incident at security seemed increasingly distant, overshadowed by the kindness and respect he had experienced since. It was a reminder that for every moment of failing, there existed countless opportunities for redemption, both personal and institutional. The flight attendant approached with a satellite phone. "Colonel Thompson, I have General Harrington for you." Thompson accepted the phone, curious about this unexpected communication. "Richard, I've just received word that the President has been briefed on today's incident," Harrington said without preamble. "He's directed his staff to ensure Operation Starlight receives the full recognition it deserves at tomorrow's ceremony. Several additional guests will be attending." Thompson felt a flutter of alarm. "Mike, I'm not comfortable with this becoming some kind of political spectacle." "It won't be," Harrington assured him. "The President specifically instructed that this remain about the mission and the men, not about current politics. He understands the difference." After completing the call, Thompson settled back as the aircraft gained altitude. The desert landscape of Arizona spread beneath him, gradually giving way to the vast patchwork of America's heartland. He had flown over this country countless times, in aircraft ranging from lumbering propeller transports to supersonic jets. But the view never failed to stir something profound within him. This land, in all its sprawling diversity, was what he had fought to defend. Not just its borders and interests, but its fundamental promise that dignity and respect were the birthright of every citizen. Sometimes the nation stumbled in, delivering on that promise, as it had at the security checkpoint today. But its capacity for self-correction, for recognizing and addressing its failings, remained one of its greatest strengths. Thompson's thoughts were interrupted by the captain's voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll forgive a brief departure from our usual in-flight announcements. I've just been informed that we have the privilege of carrying a very special passenger today. Colonel Richard Eagle Eye Thompson, one of the pilots who flew Operation Starlight, is traveling with us to Washington for tomorrow's recognition ceremony at the National Air and Space Museum." A murmur of interest spread through the cabin. Most passengers were too young to remember the Vietnam era, let alone a classified mission that had only recently been acknowledged publicly. For those unfamiliar with Operation Starlight, the captain continued, it was one of the most daring rescue missions in Air Force history. Flying at night, without modern navigation systems, Colonel Thompson and his squadron penetrated deep into North Vietnamese airspace to extract American prisoners of war under incredibly dangerous conditions. Their actions saved 37 American lives and demonstrated the lengths to which this country will go to bring its people home. Thompson felt a flush of embarrassment at being the center of attention, but there was something appropriate about having the mission finally acknowledged in the open air after decades of classified silence. As a small token of respect, the captain concluded, "We'll be flying over the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs during our route today, performing a subtle wing wave in honor of Colonel Thompson's service. On behalf of the entire crew and all of us at the airline who have served in uniform, we thank you, Colonel." The cabin erupted in applause, not the performative, obligatory kind that sometimes greeted such announcements, but genuine appreciation that built and sustained, eventually culminating in a standing ovation from those passengers who could see him past the curtain. Thompson acknowledged it with a simple nod, emotion threatening to overcome his usual reserve. The flight attendant leaned down. "Would you prefer we maintain your privacy, Colonel? We can ensure you're not disturbed." Thompson considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "No, that won't be necessary. If anyone has questions about the mission, I'm happy to answer what I can. It's been classified for too long." What followed was one of the most remarkable in-flight experiences of Thompson's long life. As word spread through the cabin, passengers came forward individually or in small groups, not to gawk or intrude, but to genuinely connect. A history teacher asked thoughtful questions about the technological challenges of the era. Parents brought children who listened wide-eyed to abbreviated but vivid descriptions of flying through anti-aircraft fire with nothing but analog instruments and exceptional skill. A Vietnamese-American woman in her 60s approached with tears in her eyes, explaining that her father had been one of the South Vietnamese allies evacuated during the fall of Saigon. "He never forgot the American pilots who risked everything," she said softly. "Neither have we." Most moving was a man in his 70s who waited until the others had returned to their seats before approaching. He moved with the careful gait of someone managing chronic pain, and his eyes held the haunted look that Thompson had seen too often in veterans of that distant conflict. "Colonel," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I was there. Hoa Lo Prison, the Hanoi Hilton, We called it. His hand trembled slightly as he extended it. I heard your engines that night. We all did. The guards were panicking, running everywhere. We didn't know what was happening until they started moving us. 3 days later, I was on a transport. Plane home. Thompson gripped the man's hand firmly, words momentarily failing him. Here, after all these years, was the living embodiment of what that perilous mission had been about. Not abstract principles or strategic objectives, but flesh and blood Americans coming home to resume their lives. "What's your name, soldier?" he finally managed. "James Weathers. I was a door gunner, 174th Assault Helicopter Company, shot down during Lam Sun 7119. Operation Starlight was for you, James," Thompson said quietly. "For all of you. Everything we did, the training, the planning, the risk, it was worth it because it meant bringing you home." Weathers nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I've lived a good life since then, Colonel. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, 1 great-grandchild on the way. None of that would have existed without what you and your men did that night." The 2 veterans spoke quietly for several minutes, sharing the unique bond of those who have seen the darkest face of war together. When Weathers finally returned to his seat, Thompson sat in reflective silence, his earlier humiliation at the security checkpoint now completely transformed in his mind, recontextualized as merely a brief, unpleasant prelude to this profound moment of connection. As the aircraft began its descent into the Washington area, Major Collins returned from her seat further back in the cabin. "Colonel, we'll be landing at Reagan National in approximately 20 minutes. I've received confirmation that your welcome party is in position." "Welcome party?" Thompson questioned, still unclear about General Harrington's cryptic message earlier. Collins smiled. "I believe you'll understand when we land, sir." The landing was textbook perfect, the kind of smooth touchdown that spoke to Captain Reynolds' skill as a pilot. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, Thompson observed something unusual through his window. An honor guard in full-dress uniform standing at attention on the tarmac. This level of ceremony was typically reserved for visiting heads of state or the highest-ranking military officers, not retired colonels. "What's all this?" he asked Collins, gesturing toward the window. "As I said, sir, I believe you'll understand momentarily." The aircraft came to a stop, and the usual chime indicated it was safe to unbuckle seatbelts. Captain Reynolds' voice came over the intercom once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at Reagan National Airport. Local time is 4:17 p.m. with clear skies and a temperature of 72 degrees. We ask that you remain seated temporarily to allow our special passenger to deplane first. Colonel Thompson, it has been the highest honor of my professional career to serve as your pilot today. On behalf of the entire crew, thank you for your service." The door opened, and the jet bridge connected with its usual mechanical precision. Major Collins gestured for Thompson to proceed ahead of her. "After you, Colonel." With his cane in hand and his composure firmly in place, Richard Eagle Eye Thompson moved toward the aircraft door, unsure what awaited him, but facing it with the same calm resolve that had carried him through a lifetime of uncertainty and challenge. As Colonel Thompson stepped through the aircraft door onto the jet bridge at Reagan National, the first person he saw was not who he expected. Standing at attention in her full-dress blues was Air Force Lieutenant General Catherine Reese, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. At 72, she remained an imposing figure, ramrod straight, her silver hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform adorned with the ribbons and medals of a distinguished 45-year career. More startling than her presence was the personal connection. Catherine Reese had been a young communications officer at Udon Royal Thai Air Force Base during Operation Starlight, the person whose steady voice had guided Thompson's squadron through that moonless night over North Vietnam. Though they had served together briefly, the crucible of combat had forged a bond that transcended time and rank. "Welcome home, Eagle Eye," she said softly, using his old call sign as she extended her hand. Thompson was momentarily speechless. They hadn't seen each other in person since a Pentagon ceremony nearly 15 years ago. "Kathy," he finally managed, "this is unexpected. When Mike Harrington called me about what happened in Tucson, wild horses couldn't have kept me away." She smiled, the warmth reaching her eyes. "Besides, someone needed to ensure the museum gets the details right for tomorrow. You know how historians can be. All facts, no feeling." As they moved from the jet bridge into the terminal, Thompson realized this was no ordinary arrival. The concourse had been partially cleared, creating a path flanked by a mix of active-duty military personnel and veterans of various ages, all standing at respectful attention. At the end of this impromptu corridor stood a group of dignitaries, including the Secretary of the Air Force and the Director of the National Air and Space Museum. "What's all this?" Thompson whispered, uncomfortable with the pageantry. "A correction," Catherine replied simply, "a rebalancing of the scales." As they walked together, Thompson with his cane, Catherine matching her stride to his measured pace, something remarkable happened. Without prompting or announcement, the uniformed service members and veterans began to salute. It started with a young Air Force lieutenant near the gate and spread like a wave down the corridor. A spontaneous demonstration of respect from one generation of warriors to another. Thompson, deeply moved but still uncomfortable as the center of attention, returned each salute with precision. "I don't deserve this," he murmured to Catherine. "It's not about deserving, Richard," she replied. "It's about honoring what you represent. Today's military doesn't have many living connections to Vietnam. Most of these young people have never met someone who flew those missions. You're not just a person to them. You're living history." As they approached the waiting dignitaries, Thompson spotted something that stopped him in his tracks. Standing slightly apart from the officials was a small group of elderly Asian men, each wearing a simple blue lapel pin that Thompson recognized immediately, the symbol of the South Vietnamese Air Force. "Are those—" he began, unable to complete the question. Catherine nodded. "VNF pilots who flew alongside you during Starlight. There were only 4 still alive and well enough to travel. When word spread about tomorrow's ceremony, they insisted on coming. They've been waiting 50 years for this mission to be acknowledged." The elderly Vietnamese pilot stepped forward as Thompson approached. Their leader, a wiry man with deep, smile lines etched into his weathered face, came to attention and saluted crisply. "Colonel Thompson," he said in accented but clear English. "I am Colonel Tran Van Min, formerly of the 514th Fighter Squadron VNF. We flew high cover for your extraction team that night." He gestured to his companions. "We have traveled far to stand with you tomorrow, to finally tell the world that Americans and Vietnamese fought as brothers for freedom." Thompson returned the salute, then, breaking protocol, extended his hand. Min took it, and in a moment that would later be captured in a Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph, the 2 elderly aviators embraced, former allies reunited after half a century. The politics and pain of a controversial war dissolved in the timeless bond of those who had faced death together in defense of shared values. "I never knew who was flying those sky raiders above us," Thompson said, his voice thick with emotion. "The cloud cover was too dense. We just knew someone was keeping the MiGs off our backs." Min smiled. "And we never saw the Americans we were protecting below the clouds. We just knew our brothers were there, bringing their people home." This unexpected reunion transformed what might have been a formal, even stilted welcome into something genuine and deeply moving. The official delegation, recognizing the power of this unscripted moment, stepped back respectfully, allowing the veterans their time together. Secretary of the Air Force Jonathan Marlowe, a thoughtful civilian leader with deep respect for the service's traditions, eventually stepped forward. Colonel Thompson, on behalf of the President and a grateful nation, welcome to Washington. We're honored by your presence and deeply disturbed by the treatment you received in Tucson. Thompson straightened, uncomfortable with the continued focus on the security incident. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate the concern, but I'd prefer we focus on tomorrow's recognition of Operation Starlight and the men who didn't return. Marlowe nodded, understanding immediately. Of course, Colonel. That's exactly why we're here, to ensure that recognition is done properly. If you're not too tired from your journey, there's someone at the museum who would very much like to show you the exhibit before tomorrow's public unveiling. Thompson glanced at Catherine, who nodded encouragingly. I think you'll want to see this, Richard. The formal motorcade that transported them from the airport to the National Air and Space Museum seemed excessive to Thompson, but he had come to understand that this was no longer just about him personally. He had become, somewhat reluctantly, a symbol of a generation, of a war, of values that transcended the conflicts in which they were tested. The journey through Washington's streets offered glimpses of a capital transformed since his early days as a young officer. New memorials, new buildings, new security measures, yet the fundamental character of the city remained, its neoclassical grandeur a deliberate echo of ancient democracies, a visual reminder of the Republic's aspirations. The last time I was here was for the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, Thompson remarked, gazing out the window. In 1982. Hard to believe that was over 40 years ago. Catherine, seated beside him, nodded. I was there too, though we didn't cross paths. It was raining. Yes, Thompson remembered. Many said the sky was weeping. Seemed appropriate. The Vietnamese pilots, traveling in the same vehicle at Thompson's insistence, listened respectfully to this exchange. One of them, the youngest of the group, though still well into his 70s, leaned forward slightly. For us, there was no memorial, he said quietly. When Saigon fell, our service became something to hide, something dangerous to acknowledge. Many of our comrades spent years in re-education camps for the crime of fighting alongside Americans. Some never returned. The car fell silent. This simple statement, a stark reminder of the divergent paths of those who had once been allies. For American veterans, recognition had been delayed and often inadequate, but for these men, it had been actively denied, their sacrifices criminalized by the victorious North Vietnamese government. Tomorrow, Thompson said with sudden conviction, we stand together. Your story will be told alongside ours. The normally congested streets around the National Mall had been partially cleared for their motorcade, allowing them to reach the National Air and Space Museum in remarkably good time. As the vehicles pulled up to a side entrance not normally used by the public, Thompson was surprised to see an elderly man in a wheelchair waiting on the broad sidewalk, a museum official hovering attentively nearby. "Who's that?" he asked, squinting through the window. Catherine smiled. That's Dr. Robert Chen, the curator emeritus of military aviation. He's 92 and officially retired 15 years ago, but when he heard about the Starlight exhibit, he insisted on coming back to oversee it personally. As Thompson emerged from the vehicle, Dr. Chen propelled his wheelchair forward with surprising strength for a man his age. His thin frame was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, complete with bow tie, and his eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses were bright with intelligence and barely contained excitement. "Colonel Thompson," he called out, extending a bony hand, "I've been waiting 50 years to meet you, sir." Thompson took the offered hand gently, conscious of the paper-thin skin and prominent veins that spoke of advanced age. "Dr. Chen, the honor is mine. The elderly curator beamed. "I was an intelligence analyst at the Pentagon during Vietnam, junior grade, very much behind the scenes. I helped compile some of the target folders for your missions." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "I've been keeping notes on Operation Starlight all these decades, waiting for declassification. When it finally happened, I told my daughter to bring me back to the museum. Retirement be damned." Thompson couldn't help but smile at the man's enthusiasm. Here was yet another invisible thread connecting him to that distant past, a reminder that great endeavors required not just those who flew the missions, but those who planned them, supported them, and ultimately remembered them. "Then you're the perfect person to show us the exhibit," Thompson said warmly. "Us?" Dr. Chen looked past Thompson, noticing the Vietnamese pilots for the first time. His eyes widened in astonishment. "Are these—" "One of pilots who flew cover during Starlight," Thompson confirmed. Dr. Chen's reaction was immediate and deeply moving. Despite his age and infirmity, he attempted to rise from his wheelchair, restrained only by the gentle hand of the museum official. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice breaking with emotion, "your contribution has been overlooked for too long. I've tried to correct that in the exhibit. Please, you must tell me if I've done your role justice." The museum had been closed to the public in preparation for the next day's ceremony, creating an almost sacred quiet within its vast spaces. Their footsteps and the soft whir of Dr. Chen's wheelchair echoed in the marble corridors as they moved toward the new exhibition space. "We've placed the Operation Starlight exhibit in a position of prominence," Dr. Chen explained as they walked, "adjacent to the Apollo program materials. Both represent the highest achievements of American courage and technological ingenuity during the same historical period. They pass through familiar galleries, displaying the iconic aircraft of aviation history: the Wright Flyer, Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis, Chuck Yeager's Bell X-1. Thompson felt the weight of this aeronautical lineage, the continuum of innovation and daring of which he had been one small part. Dr. Chen led them to a set of temporary barriers draped with blue cloth, behind which lay the new exhibition. He nodded to a museum technician who began removing the barriers. "Colonel Thompson, gentlemen, may I present Operation Starlight, the untold story of Vietnam's most daring rescue mission." The cloth barriers fell away, revealing an expansive exhibition space that took Thompson's breath away. Dominating the center was a fully restored F-4D Phantom II in the exact markings of Thompson's aircraft during the mission, suspended dramatically as if in flight through clouds represented by artful lighting effects. Around the perimeter were display cases containing artifacts, maps, photographs. Morning light filtered through the hotel room curtains, casting gentle patterns across Colonel Thompson's dress blues, which hung perfectly pressed on the closet door. He had risen before dawn, a lifetime habit that even age couldn't break. The ceremonial uniform had been delivered the previous evening by an Air Force courier, a thoughtful gesture arranged by General Harrington, who had somehow ascertained Thompson's current measurements without asking. The conversation with the President the night before had been brief but meaningful. Unlike the political theater Thompson had feared, it was a genuine exchange between a commander-in-chief and a veteran who had carried out one of the nation's most daring missions. The President had listened more than he spoke, asking thoughtful questions about the mission's execution and expressing particular interest in the South Vietnamese pilot's contribution. "Colonel Thompson," the President had said toward the end of their call, "I believe a nation reveals its character not just in how it faces its enemies, but in how it honors its promises. Operation Starlight represented America at its best, keeping our sacred commitment to leave no one behind. What happened to you at that airport yesterday represented a failure of that same principle. Please accept my personal apology." Thompson had been moved by the sincerity in the President's voice, and even more by his parting words. Tomorrow isn't just about honoring history, it's about reminding ourselves who we aspire to be. Now, as Thompson carefully dressed in his formal uniform for the first time in nearly a decade, those words resonated in his mind. The jacket fit remarkably well, though the weight of the medals and ribbons felt both familiar and strange. Physical manifestations of experiences that sometimes seem to belong to another lifetime, another self. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of his escort. Catherine Reese, also in full-dress blues, stood in the hallway, her uniform immaculate, her bearing as precise as it had been in her active duty prime. "Good morning, Richard," she said with a warm smile. "Ready for your moment in the spotlight?" Thompson adjusted his tie one final time. "As ready as I'll ever be, though I still maintain the spotlight belongs on the mission, not on me. The mission needs a face," she replied pragmatically. "People connect with people, not abstract concepts. Today, you're the living embodiment of values that might otherwise remain theoretical for younger generations." The motorcade awaiting them in front of the hotel was smaller than the previous days, but still impressive. 3 black SUVs with government plates, accompanied by police motorcycle outriders. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Is all this really necessary?" he asked. "The secretary insisted," Catherine replied with a slight shrug. "After yesterday's incident, he wants to ensure you're treated with appropriate respect at every step." As they settled into the lead vehicle, Thompson glanced out at the Washington morning. The capital was already bustling with activity, government workers hurrying to offices, tourists gathering for the day's sightseeing, the eternal machinery of democracy grinding into motion for another day. "You know what I remember most about flying?" he said suddenly, his gaze tracking a formation of birds against the blue sky. "The perspective. From 30,000 feet, human constructs, our borders, our divisions, our artificial separations, they all disappear. You see only the natural contours of the earth, the real shape of things." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "That's why pilots often make good leaders. They've seen the bigger picture in the most literal sense." Their conversation turned to the ceremony ahead as the motorcade navigated the morning traffic toward the National Mall. The event had grown significantly from its original conception as a modest museum exhibition opening. Now it included a formal military honors ceremony, speeches from dignitaries including the Secretary of Defense, and special recognition for both American and Vietnamese veterans of Operation Starlight. "The media presence will be substantial," Catherine warned. After word leaked about what happened in Tucson, interest in the story exploded. Every major network and several international outlets will be covering this. Thompson frowned slightly. "I'm not comfortable being portrayed as some kind of victim seeking vindication. What happened at the airport was unfortunate, but it's trivial compared to what many veterans have endured." "I understand," Catherine assured him. "General Harrington has been very clear with the press office about keeping the focus on Operation Starlight itself. The incident is context, not content." As they approached the National Air and Space Museum, Thompson was startled by the size of the crowd already gathered on the broad plaza in front. Hundreds of people stood behind security barriers, many waving small American flags. Some held hand-lettered signs expressing support for veterans. A military band played patriotic music near a podium draped with bunting. "I wasn't expecting this," Thompson said quietly, a hint of apprehension in his voice. Catherine patted his hand reassuringly. "They're here to say thank you, Richard. Not just to you, but to everyone who served during a time when gratitude was often withheld." The motorcade stopped at a designated drop-off point, where General Harrington waited with a formal reception committee. As Thompson emerged from the vehicle in his dress blues, a spontaneous cheer rose from the crowd. The military band transitioned smoothly into the Air Force song, its stirring melody carrying across the plaza. General Harrington stepped forward, saluting crisply. "Welcome. Colonel Thompson, quite a turnout, wouldn't you say?" Thompson returned the salute, his old military bearing returning fully in this formal context. "Overwhelming, General. I hope we can keep the focus where it belongs, on the mission and the men who didn't return." "That's precisely the plan," Harrington assured him, guiding him toward a small group of elderly men gathered near the museum entrance. The South Vietnamese pilots from the previous day, now also in dress uniforms that must have been hastily arranged. They stood proudly, their aging frames transformed by the dignified bearing that military service had instilled decades ago. Colonel Min stepped forward, executing a flawless salute that belied his years. "Colonel Thompson, today, after 50 years, our nations finally acknowledge what we accomplished together." Thompson was struck by the profound significance of this moment. Former allies from a controversial war standing together in public recognition not just of a specific mission, but of shared values that had transcended the politics of that distant conflict. It was a powerful visual statement about loyalty, commitment, and the bonds forged in the crucible of shared danger. The formal procession into the museum began, led by a color guard carrying both American and South Vietnamese flags, a thoughtful touch that visibly moved the VNF veterans. As they entered the main hall, Thompson was astonished to see it, filled to capacity with invited guests, including numerous military personnel in dress uniforms, government officials, and what appeared to be several generations of families connected to Operation Starlight. Dr. Chen waited near the entrance to the exhibition space, his wheelchair positioned so he could greet arriving dignitaries. Despite his advanced age, he sat alertly, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of seeing his curatorial vision come to fruition. Beside him stood a distinguished-looking man in his 70s, whom Thompson didn't immediately recognize. "Colonel Thompson," Dr. Chen called out as they approached, "may I present James Weathers? You met briefly on your flight yesterday, but I thought you might appreciate a more formal introduction." Thompson's expression brightened with recognition. "Mr. Weathers, of course, the door gunner from the 174th. "One of the 37 men you brought home, Colonel," Weathers said, extending his hand. "I've brought some people who wanted to meet you." He gestured to a group standing nearby, a woman about his age, several middle-aged adults, and a cluster of younger people, including children. "My family, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and this young lady," he indicated, a pregnant woman in her 20s, "is carrying my first great-grandchild. None of them would exist if not for Operation Starlight." Thompson was momentarily speechless, confronted so directly with the human impact of that long-ago mission. These weren't abstract statistics or conceptual outcomes. They were living, breathing people whose very existence traced directly back to the dangerous night flight he had led through North Vietnamese airspace. "Mr. Weathers," he finally managed, "the honor is entirely mine." One by one, the Weathers family members stepped forward to shake his hand. The youngest, a boy of perhaps 7, looked up at Thompson with solemn eyes and asked, "Did you fly the airplane that saved my great-grandpa?" Thompson knelt to the child's level despite the protest from his aging knees. "I was one of several pilots, son. We all worked together as a team to bring your great-grandfather home." "Mom says you're a hero," the boy stated with the directness only children can manage. Thompson smiled gently. "The real heroes were the men like your great-grandfather, who endured captivity with courage and dignity. We pilots just had the privilege of bringing them back where they belonged." This exchange, though brief, captured the essence of what the day was truly about. the connections between generations, the transmission of values, the living continuity of national character expressed through individual actions. As Thompson rose, he noticed several observers, including media representatives with discreetly positioned cameras, had captured the moment. For once, he didn't mind the attention, recognizing its potential value in conveying the deeper meaning of service and sacrifice to a wider audience. The formal ceremony began at precisely 10 a.m., with the Secretary of Defense offering opening remarks that placed Operation Starlight in its historical context while emphasizing its continued relevance to military doctrine and national values. He spoke eloquently about the evolution of the "leave no one behind" ethos from a tactical consideration to a moral imperative that defined American military operations around the world. When we say "no one left behind," the Secretary concluded, we affirm that every individual matters, that sacrifice will be honored, that loyalty flows in both directions. Operation Starlight stands as perhaps the most dramatic demonstration of this principle in action. Extraordinary risk accepted to secure the freedom of Americans held captive under the harshest conditions imaginable. As the Secretary yielded the podium, General Harrington stepped forward to introduce the next segment of the program. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct privilege to introduce a man whose skill, courage, and leadership made Operation Starlight possible. Flying without modern navigation systems, through heavy anti-aircraft fire, in weather conditions that would ground most flights even today, then Major Richard "Eagle Eye" Thompson led a formation of aircraft deep into hostile territory to extract American prisoners of war. Thompson rose from his seat in the front row, moving with deliberate dignity toward the podium. As he passed General Harrington, the four-star general rendered a precise regulation salute, senior to junior, present to past, acknowledging the continuity of service that transcended rank and time. The applause that greeted Thompson as he reached the podium was thunderous, sustained by an audience that understood the significance of the moment. He stood quietly, allowing it to subside naturally rather than gesturing for silence. This simple patience, this comfort with waiting until the moment was right to proceed, spoke volumes about the character that had made him an exceptional combat leader. "Thank you," he began simply when the hall had quieted. 50 years is a long time to wait for a debriefing." This gentle humor drew appreciative laughter, breaking the tension and establishing an immediate connection with his audience. Operation Starlight has been classified for decades, known only to those who participated and a handful of military historians with the highest security clearances. Today, I'm honored to share this story not just as a historical record, but as a testament to what we can accomplish when we combine technical skill with moral purpose. Thompson proceeded to describe the mission with the precision and clarity of the born instructor. He explained the navigational challenges, the weather complications, the coordination required between multiple aircraft types, and the split-second timing needed to execute the extraction under enemy fire. He used no notes, his recall of events half a century past remaining remarkably detailed, not simply because of their dramatic nature, but because he had replayed them in his mind countless times over the intervening decades. What made Starlight different from previous extraction attempts, he explained, was our understanding that this wasn't merely a tactical operation, it was a moral obligation. Every pilot, every navigator, every support crew member shared a single conviction. Those men were coming home, whatever the risk to ourselves. He paused, scanning the audience before continuing in a more reflective tone. Much has been said about the divisiveness of the Vietnam era, about a nation fractured by disagreement over the war's purpose and execution. Those divisions were real and painful, but Operation Starlight represented something that transcended political divisions. The unbreakable commitment to those who serve, regardless of the popularity of the conflict in which they fight. Thompson then did something unexpected. He stepped away from the podium and gestured toward the Vietnamese pilots seated in the front row. This commitment wasn't exclusively American. Our South Vietnamese allies demonstrated the same courage, the same dedication to leaving no one behind. While my squadron approached from below the cloud cover, Colonel Tran Van Min and his pilots flew above, keeping North Vietnamese interceptors occupied and drawing anti-aircraft fire away from our extraction force. Until yesterday, I never knew who was flying those aircraft. Today, I'm honored to stand beside them as brothers in arms. He invited Colonel Min to join him at the podium, a spontaneous deviation from the planned program that nevertheless felt entirely appropriate. The elderly Vietnamese pilot rose with dignity and moved to stand beside Thompson, the two veterans presenting a powerful visual symbol of reconciliation and shared purpose that transcended the political complexities of the war itself. Colonel, Min and his fellow pilots lost their country, Thompson continued, his hand resting lightly on the other man's shoulder. Many of their comrades spent years in re-education camps or were executed after the fall of Saigon. Yet they never lost their commitment to the values we fought for together: freedom, dignity, and the worth of the individual human being. Colonel Min stepped to the microphone, his accent pronounced but his English clear and deliberate. "We were young men from different worlds," he said simply, "but in the sky we became brothers. Today, as old men, we remain brothers. This is the true victory, not political, but human." The applause that followed this simple statement was profound, carrying emotional weight beyond mere appreciation. It represented recognition of a truth often overlooked in historical accounts of the Vietnam War, that behind the geopolitical complexities were individual human beings acting with courage and conviction on all sides. As the ceremony continued, Thompson found himself increasingly moved by the care and thoughtfulness evident in every aspect of the event. The exhibition itself was presented not as a static historical display, but as a living testament to values that remained relevant across generations. The rescued POWs and their families were given prominent recognition, their stories integrated into the narrative not as passive recipients of rescue, but as active participants in a shared demonstration of national character. Most meaningful to Thompson was the deliberate inclusion of younger military personnel, junior officers and enlisted members from all service branches who had been invited specifically to connect with veterans of previous eras. These informal conversations, taking place around the edges of the formal ceremony, represented the true transmission of institutional memory and values that no official history could fully capture. A young Air Force lieutenant approached Thompson during a brief reception following the main ceremony. "Colonel Thompson, sir," she said, rendering a perfect salute. "Lieutenant Sarah Mackenzie, 492nd Fighter Squadron. I fly F-35s out of RAF. Leakin Heath." Thompson returned the salute with equal precision. "Lieutenant, the Lightning II is quite a machine, a far cry from my old Phantom." "That's actually what I wanted to discuss, sir," she said. "We use advanced navigation systems, precision-guided munitions, satellite communications, technology you couldn't have imagined. But our squadron commander has us study Operation Starlight as a reminder that the critical factor isn't the technology, but the human element, judgment, courage, and commitment." Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "Technology changes, Lieutenant. The fundamentals don't. Know your aircraft's capabilities and limitations. Trust your training. Take care of your people. The rest is just details." "Sir," she continued, "yesterday at Tucson International, I saw the video." At Thompson's surprised expression, she quickly added, It wasn't released publicly, but the Air Force is using it in professional development seminars for officers. The contrast between the TSA agent's behavior and General Harrington's response is being taught as a case study in leadership versus mere authority. Thompson was momentarily nonplussed by this revelation. What he had experienced as a personal humiliation had already been transformed into an instructional tool. The thought was simultaneously uncomfortable and reassuring. Uncomfortable in its exposure of a vulnerable moment, reassuring in the constructive purpose to which it was being applied. "What's the key lesson they're teaching from it?" he asked, genuinely curious. "That authority is conferred by position, but leadership is earned through character," she replied without hesitation, "and that how we treat people, especially those who have sacrificed for others, reveals more about our own character than about theirs." As the young lieutenant moved on to speak with other veterans, Thompson was struck by the cyclical nature of these transmissions, how lessons learned in one generation's crucible became teaching tools for the next, ensuring that hard-won wisdom wasn't lost despite changing technologies and contexts. The formal portion of the day concluded with the official opening of the Operation Starlight exhibition to the public. Thompson, along with Colonel Min and the other VNAF pilots, stood near the entrance, greeting the first visitors and answering questions about the mission and its significance. The interaction with ordinary citizens, many too young to have any personal memory of Vietnam, proved to be one of the most rewarding aspects of the day. A middle-aged woman approached with her teenage son, waiting patiently for a moment of Thompson's attention. "Colonel," she said when her turn came, "my father was one of the 37. William Davidson, Navy lieutenant, shot down over Haiphong in 1969. Thompson nodded in recognition. "I remember Lieutenant Davidson. He had a distinctive red beard even after months in captivity. Insisted on walking to the aircraft despite his injuries." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, that sounds like him. He passed away 10 years ago, but he spoke of that night, of your mission, as the moment he was reborn. Every year on the anniversary, he would raise a toast to the crazy pilots who flew through hell to bring us home." She placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "This is his grandson, William Davidson III. He's entering the Naval Academy next fall. The legacy continues." Thompson shook the young man's hand, seeing in his eyes the same quiet determination he had recognized in so many young service members throughout his career. The commitment to something larger than themselves, the willingness to accept hardship, in service to principles and people worthy of protection. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said simply. "Remember that everything you do in uniform ultimately comes down to people. Protecting them, leading them, bringing them home." As the day progressed, Thompson found his earlier reticence about public attention gradually dissolving, replaced by a growing appreciation for the opportunity to share not just the story of Operation Starlight, but the deeper values it represented. Each conversation, each handshake, each exchange of experiences with both veterans and civilians added another thread to the complex tapestry of national memory being woven in this space. In late afternoon, as the official events wound down, General Harrington approached Thompson with an unexpected proposal. "Richard, we've arranged a small gathering this evening at Andrews Air Force Base, just military personnel, very informal. Some young pilots have specifically requested the chance to hear your thoughts on aviation, leadership, and the continuity of service across generations. Would you be willing to join us?" Thompson, though tired from the day's activities, recognized the value of such an exchange. "Of course, General. I'd be honored." The gathering at Andrews proved to be the most meaningful part of the entire experience. Away from media attention and official ceremony, surrounded by active duty personnel in an environment where military traditions remained alive and vibrant, Thompson found himself energized rather than exhausted. The questions from young officers were thoughtful and substantive, focused not on the technical details of Operation Starlight, but on the human factors that had made it successful. Decision-making under pressure, maintaining unit cohesion during high-risk operations, balancing mission requirements against personnel considerations. A young captain asked perhaps the most insightful question of the evening. "Colonel, given your experience yesterday at the airport and today at the ceremony, what would you say is the most important lesson for us to carry forward about how we, as a nation, treat those who have served?" Thompson considered carefully before responding. "The lesson isn't about special treatment or recognition," he said finally. "It's about consistency of values. When we serve, we embody certain principles: duty, honor, respect for human dignity, commitment to those under our protection. Those principles don't expire with our active service. They remain the standard by which we should measure our institutional and personal conduct in all contexts." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. What General Harrington demonstrated yesterday wasn't merely the correction of one employee's misconduct. It was the reassertion of values that define us at our best, the recognition that how we treat one another, especially those who have sacrificed, reflects our character as a nation. In that moment, he wasn't just defending me personally. He was defending a principle that transcends any individual. As the evening concluded, Thompson found himself surrounded by young officers eager for one final word of advice, one concluding insight from a man who had flown and fought in conditions they could scarcely imagine despite their advanced training. Rather than offering tactical suggestions or technical observations, he shared the perspective that 50 years of reflection had distilled to its essence. "Remember that the technology, the procedures, the structures, they're all just tools," he told them. "What endures, what ultimately matters, is the human commitment to one another. We flew through those clouds not because we had perfect equipment or ideal conditions, but because 37 Americans were counting on us to bring them home. That's the legacy I hope you'll carry forward. Not just tactical excellence, but the unbreakable commitment to the people behind the mission." As Thompson was escorted to the car that would return him to his hotel, a text message arrived from an unexpected source. It was from James Morales, the TSA officer who had conducted his secondary screening with such professionalism at Tucson International. "Colonel Thompson," it read, "I wanted you to know that Agent Daniels issued a public apology today. More importantly, he's enrolled in a veteran support program and has asked to volunteer with elderly and disabled veterans as part of his path forward. Your dignity under pressure has catalyzed positive change beyond what you might have imagined. Thank you for your service, both past and present." This simple message completed the circle that had begun with humiliation and anger, just 36 hours earlier. What had started as an individual affront had been transformed through the actions of leaders like General Harrington and Thompson's own dignified response into an opportunity for institutional reflection and personal growth. Even Agent Daniels, whose conduct had initiated the entire sequence of events, was finding a path toward greater understanding and respect. As the car moved through the nighttime streets of Washington, Thompson gazed out at the illuminated monuments that charted America's journey through triumph and tragedy. The Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, the Capitol Dome, each represented not just historical achievements, but ongoing aspirations, ideals toward which the nation continually strived despite occasional failures and setbacks. The events, of the past 2 days had reminded him of a fundamental truth about both military service and national character, that they existed in a state of perpetual becoming, constantly renewed through the actions and commitments of each generation. What Operation Starlight had represented 50 years ago, the unwavering commitment to leave no one behind, remained alive today, not as a historical artifact, but as a living principle embodied in the actions of those who continued to serve, in various capacities. Tomorrow, Thompson would return to his quiet life in Tucson, to his modest apartment filled with books and memories, to the regular rhythm of retirement. But he would carry with him the knowledge that the values for which he had risked everything half a century ago remained vital and consequential, not just in museums or ceremonies, but in the day-to-day interactions that defined national character in its most practical expression. As the Washington Monument slipped from view behind them, Thompson recalled the words of a poem he had first encountered as a cadet at the Air Force Academy, lines that had sustained him through the darkest moments of his service. The tumult and the shouting dies, the captains and the kings depart, still stands thine ancient sacrifice, an humble and a contrite heart. The circumstances changed, the technologies evolved, the political contexts shifted, but the essential commitment to duty, to honor, to bringing everyone home, remained constant across time, the thread that connected his generation to the next and the next beyond that, ensuring that what had been won at such cost would never be truly lost. And in that continuity, in that faithful transmission of values from one generation to the next, lay the true meaning of service, not just to country, but to the enduring principles that gave that service its ultimate significance. This was the legacy that would outlast any medal or monument, the living example of character under pressure, of dignity in the face of disrespect, of leadership that flowed from who you were rather than merely the position you held. It was a legacy worthy of the sacrifices that had forged it, in the skies over Vietnam, in the countless other battlefields where Americans had demonstrated their commitment to one another, and in the daily decisions through which that commitment continued to be honored and renewed. That was the final lesson of Operation Starlight, revealed not in its classified details, but in its enduring impact on the national character, that how we treat one another in our most challenging moments defines who we truly are, both as individuals and as a nation. As Colonel Thompson boarded his flight back to Tucson the following morning, he carried with him more than just the memories of an extraordinary 2 days. In his hand was a leather-bound journal presented to him by the rescued POWs and their families, each page containing a personal message of gratitude, not just for the daring rescue mission 50 years ago, but for the dignity and grace he had demonstrated at the airport security checkpoint. What had begun as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a powerful reminder of the values that defined true service. The incident that had sparked this remarkable chain of events was already affecting change beyond anything Thompson could have imagined. The TSA had implemented mandatory training for all security personnel on respectful treatment of elderly travelers, veterans, and those with medical devices. Agent Daniels, rather than simply being dismissed, had begun working with veteran service organizations, finding redemption through genuine understanding of the sacrifices made by those he had once treated with casual disrespect. General Harrington had used the experience to launch a broader initiative within the military, creating formal mentorship connections between veterans of different eras. The Starlight program, as it was called, paired retired service members with active duty personnel, ensuring that the hard-won wisdom of previous generations wouldn't be lost amid changing technologies and evolving threats. Thompson had reluctantly agreed to serve as the program's honorary chairman, recognizing the value of transforming individual experience into institutional memory. Most meaningful to Thompson was the quiet reunion that had taken place after the public ceremonies concluded. A private dinner with the South Vietnamese pilots who had risked everything flying cover for his squadron that moonless night half a century ago. They had exchanged not war stories, but life stories, sharing photographs of children and grandchildren, discussing the paths that had brought them to America after the fall of Saigon, finding common ground in the universal experiences of aging, loss, and the search for meaning in life's final chapters. As the aircraft climbed through scattered clouds into the clear blue above, Thompson gazed out the window with the practiced eye of a man who had spent much of his life in the sky. The perspective from altitude had always brought clarity, allowing him to see beyond immediate obstacles to the broader landscape. Now, that same perspective allowed him to recognize that what had happened at Tucson International wasn't just about one veteran receiving belated respect, but about an entire nation recommitting to values that transcended politics, generations, and the divisive noise of contemporary discourse. The captain's voice came over the intercom, mentioning that our distinguished passenger, Colonel Thompson, was aboard, prompting a spontaneous round of applause from fellow travelers. Thompson acknowledged it with a modest nod, understanding now that his role had evolved from warrior to witness, from pilot to storyteller, ensuring that the principles for which he and countless others had risked everything would continue to guide the nation they had served through whatever clouds might lie ahead. Because some authority is temporary, but the honor earned through sacrifice and maintained through dignity remains forever. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.